Everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm sorry this has taken me so long to get out. I've just been super busy lately, but I recently had the opportunity to sit down with Rachael Steele, who is a former distance runner, college distance runner. I'm sure she's still running. And an advocate in the eating disorder community. She is an author and a public speaker and an all-around amazing person, and she was nice enough to let me interview her. So here's that interview. Hope you guys enjoy.
Yeah. So I began running when I was like 5 years old. My mom had been a runner before I was even born. So I grew up watching her race. And we had like this little kindergarten marathon race. It was just like a big race around this field. And I took second place. So I realized I had some talent, but it also kind of instilled this competitive drive to get first place. And again, I'd been watching run as I grew up, and she kind of set a training plan for me, which was super easy. It was only like a mile every other day and then 2 miles every other day. So it was really minimal. She never pushed me into it. And I guess you could say I just kind of grew up as a runner. So it's always been a part of me, and it really formed my identity.
Wow, you were so young. I started when I was in high school, so I haven't been doing it for that long, but
Oh, yeah.
So did you always know you wanted to run in college, or when did that come in?
I for sure knew I wanted to run in college. Since I was a young girl running, I was like, I wanted to go to the Olympics. I wanted to, be one of the best runners in the world. And I thought that if I started running that young, like, how could I not be such a great runner? So I had like these really big dreams. And by the end of high school, I did well, but I kind of knew in reality I probably wouldn't ever go to the Olympics. But I always loved running. Like, it was a huge passion, and like I said before, a big identity of mine. So I definitely wanted to run in college, and I went to a smaller college because I enjoyed the coach. He was really supportive of me as, a person and teammate rather than just my speed. So I really valued that, and I knew that would be a big part of enjoying college cross country too, or track also.
Was it D1, D2, D3?
So NAIA is kind of like its own. It's different from the NCAA.
Oh, yeah.
And I think one or two divisions. I'm not even sure which division it was. I didn't look that much into it. It was mostly, I guess you can just say NAIA was like a different entity than the NCAA. So I would say it's comparable to D2 and D3 schools.
Mm-hmm. But it was still very competitive.
Yeah, definitely. There was some fast women and men in there.
And how was the recruiting process for you? Was it hard or easy? Because for me, it was so daunting and scary.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I was so stressed out when I was in the recruiting process, because I was stuck between three schools. One, Aquinas, with the NAIA. Another was a D1 college. Another was a D2. And they were offering me, various scholarships. But I wanted to be happy with where I went, and I wanted the right coach. And then you also have to find a place that's going to meet your academics and what you want to do with your life, career-wise. So, I definitely broke down a few times trying to figure out where I wanted to go. But ultimately, it came down to going to a school that would match, what I enjoyed for a future career, and with a coach that was going to support me no matter what happened. I think one of the questions my mom asked the Aquinas coach was what would happen if, Rachael suddenly couldn't run anymore, she got injured. And he said something along the lines of always being there and supportive, and that I would keep my scholarship, and not basing everything on, well, only if you're fast, then we'll value you,
Mm-hmm.
So that was an important part of the decision process as well.
That is so nice, because right now I'm coming back from an injury, and I'm so stressed, because how everyone always says summer mileage is so important, but for me, I haven't been doing like anywhere close to the mileage that I should be doing for like cross country, and I'm just like so nervous. Like my coach is like typical D1, like very strict, and it's just like it's stressful. Like there's so much pressure there to like want to return. So it's good that your coach is like, like not pressing you in that way.
Exactly, because I think a lot of runners are, like, to begin with, we're already really hard on ourselves, and we have high expectations of ourselves. So I think it's important for a coach to have, expectations, but when the pressure gets to be too much combined with the pressure we already have on ourselves, that kind of can lead to injuries or mental difficulties. So it's important to find a balance, definitely.
So going into the eating disorder, when was like the timeline of this? Did it start your freshman year, or when did that all kind of happen?
Yeah, so my eating disorder developed actually near my senior year, near the end of my senior year of high school. I had always kind of had a weird body image. I think it was relatively normal. Unfortunately, normal is having a little bit of body dissatisfaction. But like growing up, really attentive to nutrition, because I thought, like eat healthy food so you feel well. And for running, it was always kind of for running.
Yeah.
And I made a connection going into my senior year of cross country that I could manipulate my body to feel better about myself. It's a combination of factors that kind of triggered the eating disorder, but it initially wasn't with the intention to try to run faster, because I always thought, I had a normal body type. But the biggest thing is I just thought my body was kind of broken. I always just ate too much. It was my warped perception, I guess you could say. So it started at school. I developed anorexic tendencies, and I was kind of involved with that through my freshman year of college. And then it developed into binge eating disorder my sophomore year of college, and eventually bulimia by my junior and senior years of college. And that's actually a pretty common pattern. Based on the people I usually talk to who have experienced eating disorders, usually it starts a phase of like restricting, then binging, and sometimes developing into bulimia. So I'm definitely not alone when I talk about my story. And I guess I just want to emphasize that because I'm hoping to speak for other people who might be afraid to start talking about this.
Yeah, and what did your coaches or teammates like know about it or anything? Because I know we had this girl on our team, and she was struggling with an eating disorder, but we didn't see the signs, or we didn't know what was going on until she had suddenly left in the middle of the semester, and we had no idea why. We didn't know at all. So did anyone know about that you were feeling this and like doing these things?
I think some people suspected it, but the biggest thing I think we're starting to realize with the eating disorders now too is you can't see an eating disorder. We had this idea for so long that, it's someone who's very obviously thin and looks like she's just skin and bones, but it doesn't look that way. And I think one of my friends in high school noticed that I just seemed really sad. I'd kind of fallen into a depression. A big part of it was I wasn't eating enough, because when you're not eating enough, you get really sad. So she noticed that emotionally I wasn't right. And so, I don't think she connected it to being an eating disorder, but she kind of asked what was up, and I just kind of pushed her aside politely. And then I think once I got into college, my teammates were wary about how thin I was, and they didn't really say anything, but I think they kind of suspected it. But I also believe it's such a tough thing to approach. And actually, when I first gained some weight from binging, my coach kind of mentioned, he's like, well, you look a lot healthier at this weight. Like, he was excited that I had gained weight, which was actually really helpful for me when I was super embarrassed that I'd gained, the first 10 pounds or whatever. So different people notice different things. and they didn't really conclude it was an eating disorder until I came out and said it.
I feel like sometimes it's almost just like something that's like unspoken. Like we have this girl now who we all kind of questioned, like, okay, we think she might be restricting, but we just like had no idea what to do in that kind of situation. And even like our coach isn't one who would be, because he's very, like I said before, he's the type of person that's kind of like, oh, you're skinny, that's good, that's what we want, you know what I mean? But like
Yeah.
we just like had no idea how to even approach the situation, and the coach wasn't helpful. And we do like body pods, so we like test our like body weight and amount percent fat that we have on our body, so it's like a very negative environment for that. So we just didn't know what to do after like what had happened the past year. We knew that we should probably say something, but distance runners are very like type A, like I'm sure because
Yeah.
you had that, but so it's hard to like kind of approach someone who doesn't want to hear it at the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know. Do you have any tips on what you would do helping a teammate in this kind of situation? Like what you would want to hear or would be responsive to?
Right. Well, I mentioned that friend who had noticed that I was emotionally different in a negative way. I think it was really helpful that she noticed that and asked me, because the moment she did, I just kind of burst out crying, and I didn't realize I was so sad. It didn't really prompt me to look further into what was going on, because she didn't really keep talking to me about it. But I think if you suspect anyone, like a teammate or anything, is going through something, just always keeping open communication, because obviously eating disorders are really tricky, and people who are going through them, especially if they're restricting food, they're not likely to want to give that up if they see, I guess, so-called benefits of doing so. It's usually people who start to experience binge eating disorder that freak out, and they don't like this part of the eating disorder. They don't like the weight gain, and that's when they are, I guess, more willing to get help, because they want the binging to stop, unfortunately. So the biggest thing I'd say is everyone's different, but the most important thing that anyone ever did for me, like with my parents, my friends, my coach, is they were always listening. They offered to get me support. My mom especially offered to get me a therapist and dietitian, who both specializing in eating disorders, because she could only help me so much. As teammates, as family, if we are not, qualified or counselors or anything in eating disorders, we're not, as much as we may want to help fix someone, we're not the ones to do it. The best things we can do are to support them and to always be listening. And I think if you suspect someone is struggling and they're not trying to seek help, at least alerting maybe someone at the school or the coach, if the coach is willing to work on this too, to encourage them to see that something they're doing isn't healthy, is a really good approach as well.
Your teammates, like once you came out and told them, were they supportive?
Yeah, it took a long time before I actually told them. I think most of them pretty much found out when I started my website, runninginsilence.com. That was kind of my coming out, because I had told a few teammates, like the really close ones to me and my family knew, but starting that website, everyone on the team basically saw it and they're like, oh, okay, so this makes sense. Everything's kind of coming together. And when I actually told them all in person, I actually had to take off the season of track because of the eating disorder, and that's when I told them. They were very, very supportive. They, again, didn't have to understand it, but they were giving me hugs. They said if there's anything I needed, that they would be there for me. I had some teammates who would text me and make sure I was doing okay. Like, some nights I'd have a binge and have to my teammates to work through it, and they didn't necessarily have to talk about the binge with me, but just being there with kind of distracting me was really helpful.
Yeah, I know there's like so much stigma around it, and I know like a lot of my teammates had actually responded negatively to this girl that I had told you about, and which I think is very bad, but just in a way that they were so shocked and surprised since we didn't know about it in that Because obviously, if you're not eating, you're not yourself. So I feel like a lot of people may look at it and think, oh, I can't believe she did this and that and all of these things, and she kept this from us, and will feel like very like some type of way about it, and in a negative way. Did you ever have like
Yeah.
experiences with that, or?
There was a girl, I don't want to specify her or anything, but yeah, there's who felt like, oh my gosh, she's like throwing out her meals or whatever, like, oh, that's so gross, or she's stealing food from me, which unfortunately are parts of the eating disorder. And for anyone who doesn't have an eating disorder, it's like, oh my gosh, they're stealing food, or they're actually doing something as gross as, you know, that is really difficult for anyone else to grasp on the outside. So I can see where people can have negative reactions, and I've had experiences listening to it. And I think also when anyone's going through anorexic tendencies, or, you know, have developed full-blown anorexia, and they're racing really well and getting better times, I think it kind of creates some animosity, because it's like they're doing this destructive thing to their bodies, but they're being rewarded for it. So, I mean, I had a girl who joined the team a few years after, and I was in my binging phase, and she was dealing with anorexia, and she was suddenly running really well. So even though I adored her as a friend and a teammate, a part of me was still like competitive, because we're all competitive.
Yeah.
And a part of me was angry that, like, oh, why did she get to get away with this eating disorder, you know?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of conflict, and I think it all depends on the personalities and people who have actually dealt with an eating disorder or haven't. But I think there's definitely a combination of both.
In the running world, do you think that it should be like talked about more, or like, do you think coaches coming in should address it? Or I don't know if some coaches do, or stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if coaches addressed it every season. I know not all coaches are comfortable talking about it, so I think if they're not comfortable or they don't have enough knowledge, that they should bring someone else in who does. And I mean, even when I was in high school, we never talked about eating disorders. We did, like, in my health class, but it just kind of perpetuated the stereotype that eating disorders are super thin girls. They always throw up in the bathroom. Like, we didn't have a broader idea of what eating disorders looked like. So I didn't think they really happened in the running world. And when it was happening to me, I didn't recognize it. I was extremely confused. So I think even the conversations we're having now about it more, you know, with Lauren and actually speaking on the subject, and some other prominent figures in the running world just coming out about their own experiences, I think we are getting the conversation going. But you are so right. Like, we need our coaches to be on the same page and to be talking about it every season, to the point that I feel like we can encourage anyone who's on the team to be open, no matter what they're dealing with eating disorders, and just, I guess, have that broader idea of what an eating disorder looks like. They can learn to recognize it and when it goes out of hand.
Is this why you turned to like writing a book, and how did that all get started?
Yeah, I had always wanted to be an author. I didn't realize I'd be writing about an eating disorder. So yeah, I'd wanted to write since I was 5, and I'd been writing kind of my own journal entries as I started college, just about my experiences, but I was also always writing about food, especially when I started raw food diet. I started that at the end of my freshman year. I am no longer doing that, but I was starting that. So I was writing about it, and I realized over the next 4 years of continually writing that I had an important story to share. And that's also why I started the website runninginsilence.com, because I wanted to share the journal entries and just speak on the subject more, and kind of analyze or understand why or how I was doing all of that by looking back at those journal entries too. So I guess, yeah, once the website got going, I saw that there's a story, and I was like, oh, this is my chance to write a book and, you know, really get this subject out there. And just, you know, the first few times I talked about it, I felt so embarrassed and ashamed, but the more I, you know, spread the message on my website, I realized so many people were going through the same thing and that we needed material like this that everyone could read. And I wanted to share also what worked for me in hopes that it might help other people maybe come to terms with their eating disorder or work towards a recovery or find ways to see it in their teammates and hopefully help them.
Yeah, I think it's so, I just like love the feeling when you finally like put something, like you get something off your chest. Like I did, like last year I started this like mini blog. I haven't kept up with it, but I posted something about how everyone on the internet just seems so much happier than they actually are. And I was like, I don't know why, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just such a, like, standard there on internet. Everyone is, like, having the best time of their life. And I wrote about it, and I was like, well, I'm actually just, like, I'm doing fine, but, like, I'm not as amazing as my Instagram photos would show, you know? And it was, like, really nice getting the positive feedback and people being like, I feel like this, too. And it's like, wow.
Social media has been, you know, there's always advantages and disadvantages to it, but I think it allows us to connect with each other in a different level. Obviously, it's not connecting face to face, but it kind of makes us more brave to put stuff out there that we otherwise wouldn't in person. So I think it's a great, and I think that it's actually a big part of why we're able to get this message out more and more.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. Like, I don't know, it's definitely scary at first, but like for some reason I feel more comfortable sharing with these complete strangers than the people that I am like closest with, like with my friends. Like, it's just, there's something cool about just like kind of being anonymous and, you know, having people that can relate to you that may be like super far away, but they know what you're going through.
Exactly, yeah.
The last thing, the new Netflix series, or I guess it's a movie, like To the Bone. Have you seen it?
I have, yep.
And you have thoughts on it? I just watched it like a few nights ago.
Okay. So I also just watched the movie Feed today, which is another eating disorder movie that came out that hasn't been talked about as much as To the Bone. I will get to that. But yes, I saw To the Bone. I am glad that there's an eating disorder movie out because, again, it's starting the conversation. And I think even though it kind of does perpetuate some of the stereotypes that I talked about earlier in this, you know, the thin, anorexic white girl, you know, it doesn't expand as much on all the other eating disorders. I know they like have someone as an example of binge eating disorder and bulimia, so they do get all the eating disorders in there, which I think is great. So they have like good and not so wonderful things about the movie. But again, there's like all the calorie counts and numbers that I think could be potentially triggering to other people. And I mean, I've watched quite a few other eating disorder movies. They're pretty old, but I'm sure a lot of people can find them on YouTube and everything. And I've read like so many eating disorder books just to get an idea of what's out there. And again, I'm happy they did the movie, but it was a very, very similar story to what I've read and watched. And I really think we're in the time where we can give a different kind of story rather than the one we've seen and heard over and over again. So that kind of brings me to the movie Feed. I'm trying to think who acts in that. I think she's from Pretty Little Liars or something. I don't watch too much TV or anything. But I think it gives a good portrayal of eating disorders in the way that it's not about someone wanting to look like a model in a magazine or like be super thin for appearances. It's a mental illness that's a traumatic experience, which again, not everyone develops eating disorders from a traumatic experience, but it's one example that I feel like was really powerful. And I'm going to actually add on one more. It's not a show that they're trying to get out there. I think it's Angela I can't, Gulner or something. She created a series called Binge, and you can find it on YouTube. But it is very relatable to people who are dealing with binge eating disorder and bulimia, because that's just as prevalent, if not more, than anorexia. So I think we're on the right track where we're getting these kind of movies and shows out there, but I want to see more variety. And it's not to say the anorexic story isn't important. It absolutely is. And I think To the Bone speaks to that, but we've seen it already. So, yeah, I just think there's a lot of other stories out there that we could look at as well.
Yeah, I was actually kind of disappointed with the movie. I don't know. I thought it was very like very bland, and they didn't really like, I don't know, I guess I wanted to see more of like kind of inside her head instead of just like the overall like story of it, which I don't know. I thought it was going to be deeper than what it really was, and then like I don't know. It just like wasn't.
Yeah. Even just as a movie in general, it just didn't feel very powerful. I didn't leave it feeling like, wow, that was at least like a well-told movie or well-shown movie.
Yeah.
It hit me as something super powerful. Yeah.
I mean, they did have a nice little guy in there, and they kind of like stuck the romance in, and I feel like that kind of took away from the whole focus of the movie, like in her recovery. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think it's gotten as much negative feedback as the 13 Reasons Why, but
yeah.
Anyway, I'll check out those other movies actually, because I've only seen like the documentaries that they have on YouTube, but I haven't seen any of the other like movies or shows.
Oh, definitely check out Binge. There's only like 2 episodes on YouTube because I think they're trying to launch it. They're trying to get someone to take on the show so they can actually film more episodes. They do a fantastic job with that. And then, yeah, definitely look into Feed. It just came out like a few days ago. And again, I'm surprised that's not getting as much coverage because I think that was a pretty well done movie in the eating disorder realm. Yeah.
I'm sure it's just because this is like a Netflix original movie, like To the Bone is, so that probably was the reason it caused a stir.
Right.
Anyway, thank you so much for letting me interview you and for being on this podcast.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for having me.
Hopefully we can stay in touch, and I'm going to link all your information and everything below.